This is a spiritual battle. This is not new. This goes back thousands of years. I would say this literally goes back to the very beginning.
In order to understand this present darkness, of course we had to uncover its origins in the past. There was no other man more qualified than biblical archaeologist Henry B. Smith, Jr. of the Associates for Biblical Research.
Archaeology is a tool that can be used properly and carefully as an apologetic resource, as an educational resource, as a biblical resource to help people understand that what we find in Holy Scripture are not stories, they're not myths. These are actual events that took place in time and space. And the sovereign God who reveals himself in Scripture has preserved these things in Scripture for us to understand human history, to understand our need for salvation, that we have a sin problem, a very wretched and deep one, that needs a redeemer. Jesus warns his hearers, and he uses this very powerful picture of putting a millstone around the neck of someone being tossed into the sea.
It would be better for them to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck than to cause one of these little ones to stumble. So watch yourselves.
Unfortunately, in history and even in the modern day, that children are attacked, abused, and in many cases even kidnapped and murdered. One of the first passages that we see in the Old Testament is both in Leviticus 18 and 20, and it refers to what seems strange to the modern reader at first glance, is the practice of child sacrifice. Particularly, we have mentioned in these passages where God is giving absolute commands to the Israelites not to participate in the sacrifice of their children, to give them over to Molech. What we see in these warnings in the Old Testament that God is warning the Israelites are not just mere inventions. The Israelites are not just making up these gods, but they actually exist. All of it, though, involves the giving over of small children, usually very small from what we understand from the archaeological evidence, to these gods. In the book of Jeremiah, we see a mention of it that it looked like it was taking place in the valley of Hinnom, right outside the city walls of Jerusalem. What's interesting about that is eventually that place gained the name Gehenna, which Jesus uses the motif for hell. Now, when we think about the practice of child sacrifice in antiquity, people in the West often think of this as some barbaric practice of the world in the past. People kind of want to close their eyes to the parallels that we have with the practice of abortion. The only distinction from a human standpoint that we're talking about is that the child is not born yet versus a child that's born.
63,459,781 total abortions since 1973. What if instead of sacrificing children to the sound of beating drums on blazing altars, they merely concealed themselves in discreet brick buildings with forceps and vacuum pumps? In 1984, one of the most disturbing and underreported cases of child sacrifice was discovered in a Los Angeles shipyard. In a repossessed shipping container, workers discovered over 16,500 aborted babies.
One of them fell down and hit me right in front of my feet. And it was opened up, and there it was. It was a mutilated body. And the more closer I looked at it, it was a human body.
And when I came to work the following day, I saw it myself. I couldn't believe it. And just little bitty babies, just all torn pieces. Their heads chopped off, arms, legs.
And as bizarre and demented as that sounds, in December of 2020, Indiana authorities discovered a total of 2,411 medically preserved fetal remains in the possession of Dr. Ulrich Klopfer. There seems to be no logical explanation for such a volume of deceased babies, until you learn that each one can yield thousands of dollars when sold to various institutions.
Planned Parenthood is accused of some disturbing crimes today. Anti-abortion activists released an undercover video filmed last year. It claims to show a senior official discussing how the organization sells aborted baby parts.
The value of the fetal brains alone in that container was $35 million. Yes, $35 million. The official narrative is that they were preserved due to an inability to properly dispose of them at the time of abortion. A far more reasonable conclusion is that they were moving product. In the past, sacrifices to Moloch might yield better crops or victory in battle. But this evil has evolved into a capitalist enterprise where the blood of these little ones translates into millions in profit.
Perhaps the particulars have changed over time, but the spirit is still the same, and it has a thread all throughout history. We're going to sacrifice this child so we can get what we want in return. So the question is Moloch being paid today? Our archaeological research shows definitively that this practice took place for over centuries. So why in the world would we think that it wouldn't persist today?
My name is Brandy Brassell. I work with Warrior Bride Ministries. We are a ministry that we minister inner healing and deliverance, but we specialize in some of the most traumatized survivors of satanic ritual abuse and human trafficking. I think that satanic ritual abuse is a lot greater and a bigger problem than most realize, and probably even myself submersed in it as I am. Every neighborhood with 250 homes in it, 14 had satanic ritual abuse taking place. We had a client come in that his grandmother had brought him in. He was, from what I understand, fairly high up in ranking in a satanic, I guess, congregation or coven. And he talked about killings and murders and rituals that he had experienced. And an army. He spoke of it like it was an army, because it is. The enemy is after our children at whatever cost and whatever avenue he can get to them at.
I'm a satanic ritual abuse survivor. The Christian church says all the time that they fight an enemy, but I don't think they're aware of how organized and strategic the enemy that they're fighting is. That there is an intentional plan to break their children. An entire war for their offspring.
The things I've heard from our survivors are the very things that you read about in Deuteronomy, with the children being passed through the fire to Moloch. It's not something new. It's been happening. It's for ages. And people want to stick their head in the sand and act like it's not happening, or this is not true, or it's made up, or it's a conspiracy. I've met too many people with the same story from different places all over the world. We've got clients in New Zealand and in Canada that tell a very similar story, and there's no way that they could have made that up. They're too similar in circumstances. The rituals are the same. The torture and the trauma is the same.
We started investigating these secret satanic cults when a British Member of Parliament linked them with the ritual murder of children. In this day and age, it sounded too far-fetched, as did suggestions that the same thing might be happening in Australia. But then we met Teresa. Teresa is now 15, but at the age of 2, she was left in the care of this woman, the grandma she called Nan. And that, she says, is when her torment started.
During these ceremonies, was Satan, the devil, ever referred to?
He was called Lucifer.
What did they say about the devil, about Lucifer?
That killing the people made him happy.
Sacrifices to please the devil. According to Teresa, the worst rituals took place at a house somewhere in the country.
It was big, you know, expensive. From the front, it looked like a castle. You know, it had a long drive and big double wooden doors.
Do you think they were rich people then?
Very rich.
People don't understand how organized it is. There's a satanic calendar. Grand climaxes happen 4 times a year. Those are major festivals. Think of your Christmas, your Easter, big holidays. We're talking major rituals, the September marriage to the beast ceremony. And if you look at the dates, the majority of kidnappings in the United States happen a week before, because there's a preparation. Each satanic holiday requires a specific sacrifice, whether it be blood or sex or an animal, newborn babies, whatever they needed for blood.
Let me get this right now. Are you saying that you saw more than one person killed in that house?
Yeah. I've seen loads of babies killed there, just newborn babies, or aborted ones which were only small. You know, 4-year-olds. Any age, really.
1/6 of Georgia has 37 covens. 37 covens. 4 grand climaxes a year that require the sacrifice of a child or a woman. That's a lot of people.
Where do the kids come from? The majority that are used for this.
People don't want to know that answer.
If you're finding this hard to believe, so did I at first.
If there is an expert on satanic cults, it would have to be him.
Do you believe Teresa's story?
I believe Teresa's story. It's exactly the same story as I've heard from men who says they've done it.
You've dealt with other cases like hers?
Yes.
21 cases like hers, he says, in the past 2 years alone.
Themes like they were put in boxes with spiders and worms, where they were trapped in fear, where there was a high use of excrement and urine, where there was talk of human sacrifice.
Take just one of those rituals, putting children in boxes with spiders and worms. Now, listen to what Teresa told her mother.
And they had a coffin-like box that children were put in with spiders and snakes, and the lid shut and left in there.
Did you ever encounter adrenochrome rituals?
Growing up, yes.
What was that?
What was that like? It was the brutal torture of children within an inch of their life.
This is the artwork displayed in the home of Tony Podesta, a DNC super lobbyist. Is this life imitating art? Or is this art imitating life? And the bigger question, who are the faces in these paintings? And where do they come from? And what if your neighborhood pizza parlor had an art showing like this? It makes you wonder, are we the crazy ones? Or have we just been paying attention?
The story of Teresa is a story almost too horrible to recount. A case of child abuse that goes well beyond the kind of things we normally associate with the abuse of children. In 27 years of reporting, it has to be one of the most painful stories I have ever had to tell.
You mean you had a child?
Yeah.
How old were you when you had that child?
11.
Motherhood at the age of 11. But from what Teresa told her mother, it wasn't the only pregnancy.
We think about 7 or 8 times. It's hard to say. It was constantly happening from the time she was capable of being pregnant.
What would happen to the fetuses, the unborn babies?
I used to be taken away most of the time, and one time baby was taken out of me and then killed in front of me because it was still alive.
And then what would happen?
Well, after they killed it, they would eat it.
This is a very common occurrence to encounter survivors that have lost children. And as children, they've lost children. I think as young as 11 years old is what I've heard and encountered of babies having babies and watching them be sacrificed.
Multi-generational ritual abuse survivors. We're talking about if I were to have a child who had a child who had a child that's undocumented in these rings.
So they breed kids for the specific purpose of using them for sacrifice?
Breeders. And it's more common than you think. And the rest of the kids, from foster care, orphans, people that don't have any family.
We have had several clients come that were trafficked and transported through Child Protective Services and foster care system. Federal or state organizations, they want to deny that it exists or deny the problem because a lot of our children are passing through their hands. They are absolutely a part of the problem.
There are hundreds of children in Arizona who are missing right now from state custody.
State lawmakers are now questioning how 70 foster kids can go missing.
In the meantime, the Arizona Department of Child Safety says tonight they can't locate 44 children who are supposed to be in their custody.
Investigators believe the 4 children may have been taken from their foster home.
They recovered 25 missing and endangered children over the last month. 1 in 4 was part of what they believe an alleged human trafficking situation.
In Orange County last year, they had a bust for these traffickers. 65% of those victims were wards of Child Protective Services. Not only were they wards of Child Protective Services, but check this out, they were never reported missing.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
So maybe they were literally sold by
well,
people within Child Protective Services.
This trafficking is a lot bigger and a lot more involved politically than we care to look at or the media won't cover. Everybody's afraid because there's some real big heavy hitters that are very influential that are involved.
I totally believe that the majority of the government is either involved, covering it up, or has intentionally put blinders up so that they don't have to deal with it. 4 years ago, Brian Kemp's wife told you that the state of Georgia lost 3,600 kids to trafficking. Where'd they go? If each cousin, all 37 of them, needs a sacrifice 4 times a year minimal, that accounts for a good chunk of them, doesn't it?
What is it that they do not want uncovered that is leading to this body count?
Who's involved? Do you want me to die? How deep it goes is insurmountable.